014 8 hours. November 13, 1942. Iron Bottom Sound, Guadalcanal. Lieutenant Commander William E. Hank stands on the bridge of USS Laffey DD-459 watching tracer fire arc across the water 3,000 yards to port. The destroyer has been at general quarters for 2 hours. The crew is tired. They've been at sea for 11 days straight running escort missions and shore bombardment operations. Now they're part of Task Group 67.4, 13 ships steaming in column formation northwest of Guadalcanal. Intelligence reported Japanese ships approaching from the north. Big ships. The radio chatter coming from the cruisers ahead in the formation confirms it enemy contact. Hank doesn't know it yet, but his ship is about to sail directly into the middle of the most confused naval engagement of the war. In 24 minutes, Laffey will be fighting for its life against ships that outweigh it by a factor of 30. In 42 minutes, the destroyer will be dead in the water and sinking. But for right now, at 148 hours, Hank's primary concern is maintaining station in the formation, while the cruisers ahead work out what they're shooting at. The confusion started 16 minutes ago when radar operators on USS Helena detected surface contacts at 27,000 yards, 13.5 nautical miles. Admiral Daniel Callahan, commanding Task Group 67.4 from the cruiser San Francisco, ordered the formation to come left to heading 310 degrees. The column turned 13 ships in line ahead, Fletcher-class destroyers in the lead, cruisers in the middle, older destroyers bringing up the rear. Laffey occupied the 8th position behind 4 destroyers and 3 cruisers ahead of 2 cruisers and 3 destroyers. This formation made sense for anti-submarine screening. It made no sense for surface combat against superior forces at night. But Callahan hadn't expected to fight tonight. He'd expected to intercept a Japanese bombardment force, drive it off with superior radar-directed gunnery, and retire before dawn. Instead, the two forces were closing at a combined speed of 41 knots, and the neat geometric assumptions of radar fire control were about to collapse into point-blank chaos. USS Laffey DD-459 was a Benson-class destroyer commissioned on March 31, 1942. The ship measured 348 feet 3 inches in length, displaced 1 630-ton standard and 2 395 tons at full load, and could sustain 37.5 knots with all 4 Babcock and Wilcox boilers online. The main battery consisted of 5 5-inch 38-caliber dual-purpose guns in single mounts, 2 forward, 1 amidships, 2 aft. 10 21-inch torpedo tubes and 2 quintuple mounts provided anti-ship capability. 4 50-caliber machine guns and depth charge racks completed the armament. The Benson class represented the Navy's pre-war destroyer doctrine: enough speed to screen battleships, enough anti-aircraft capability to defend against air attack, enough torpedoes to threaten enemy capital ships, and enough seakeeping to operate in the North Atlantic. The design traded armor for speed and firepower. Plating thickness ranged from 3/8 of an inch on the main deck to 5/8 of an inch around the magazines, adequate to stop shell fragments, completely inadequate against direct hits from anything larger than machine gun fire. The crew numbered 250 officers and enlisted men, 15 officers and 235 enlisted. They lived in spaces that would be considered inhumane on civilian vessels. Enlisted men, hot-racked in berthing compartments where bunks were shared between watch sections. Officers doubled up in staterooms, measuring 8 feet by 6 feet. The galley could seat 40 men at a time, requiring 5 meal sittings to feed the crew. Everything was cramped, damp, and constantly in motion. Destroyers pitched and rolled in moderate seas. In heavy weather, they became carnival rides where men wedged themselves into corners to sleep, and meals required 1 hand for holding on and 1 hand for eating. But destroyers could do things cruisers and battleships could not. They could accelerate from 15 to 35 knots in 90 seconds. They could reverse engines and go from full ahead to full astern, thrashing the water into foam and pivoting the ship around its center of mass. They could launch torpedoes that could sink capital ships, then disappear into smoke screens at speeds battleships couldn't match. In daylight, with room to maneuver, a destroyer division could be extraordinarily dangerous to larger ships. At night, in restricted waters with friendly ships on all sides, and enemy ships intermixed with the formation, destroyers became targets. Laffey's war began 8 months earlier with convoy escort duty between the East Coast and Panama. In June 1942, the destroyer transferred to the Pacific Fleet and joined Destroyer Squadron 12. August brought the first taste of combat shore bombardment missions, supporting the Marine landings at Guadalcanal, screening duties for carrier task forces, anti-submarine patrols in waters where Japanese submarines prowled nightly. The crew learned their trade quickly. Combat accelerated the learning curve. On August 9th, they witnessed the Battle of Savo Island. From 20 miles away, 4 Allied cruisers sunk in 32 minutes by a Japanese surface force that appeared struck and vanished before effective response was possible. The lesson was clear: Japanese night fighting capability exceeded American training equipment and doctrine. The Navy was learning, but learning cost ships. By October, Laffey had participated in 3 separate engagements: the Battle of Cape Esperance on October 11th, screening duty during the Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands on October 26th, and multiple shore bombardment missions against Japanese positions on Guadalcanal. The crew was exhausted. The ship showed wear from sustained operations. The forward fire room required constant attention after near-miss bomb damage had sprung hull plates. The No. 3 5-inch mount had a feed mechanism that jammed every 200 rounds, requiring the gun captain to clear it manually. The port torpedo mount traverse motor burned out and required hand cranking for target alignment. The Navy had no replacements to send. Every destroyer in the South Pacific operated beyond its design parameters. Ships stayed at sea until they broke down or took damage, requiring shipyard repair. Crews stood 4 hours on watch, 4 hours off, then 4 hours on again, 7 days a week for months. Fatigue became the baseline condition. Men fell asleep at battle stations. Officers dozed standing up during quiet watches. The corpsmen dispensed Benzedrine tablets to watchstanders who couldn't stay awake without pharmaceutical assistance. But the ship could still fight. The guns worked. The engines ran. The torpedoes would launch when fired. That made Laffey operational by the standards of November 1942, when operational meant hasn't sunk yet. At ERA 150 hours, the formation enters gun range of the Japanese force. Admiral Callahan's column is now approximately 3,000 yards from the nearest Japanese ships. The geometry is catastrophic. The American column is sailing northwest directly toward a Japanese force that has split into 2 groups. One group crossing ahead of the American formation from port to starboard, another group already on the starboard side. The Americans are about to sail between the 2 Japanese forces, which include 2 battleships, 1 cruiser, and 14 destroyers. Nobody in Callahan's force fully understands this yet. The Helena's radar shows multiple contacts, but radar cannot identify ship types. The contacts could be cruisers or destroyers or transports. The admiral delays opening fire, hoping to achieve identification before committing to engagement. Japanese doctrine emphasizes immediate aggressive action. American doctrine emphasizes positive identification to avoid firing on friendly ships. This doctrinal difference is about to cost lives. At 0151 hours, star shells burst overhead, Japanese cruisers illuminating the American column. The night turns into day. Suddenly, every American ship is visible silhouetted against the darkness. The Japanese formation, darker and harder to see against the dark backdrop of Guadalcanal, has perfect targeting solutions. Admiral Callahan transmits, "Odd ships commence fire to starboard, even ships to port." This order assigns firing sectors, but doesn't account for target priority, or the fact that multiple American ships might engage the same target while ignoring others. Coordination dissolves. Each ship chooses its own targets based on what it can see. The formation that made sense in peacetime exercises falls apart the moment the first shells are fired. Laffey is an even-numbered ship, 8th in column. The ship is supposed to fire to port, but Lieutenant Commander Hank sees targets to starboard that are much closer. Japanese destroyers are crossing ahead of the formation at 2,000 yards, well within gun range. Hank makes the decision to engage targets to starboard regardless of the tactical order. The forward 5-inch mounts traverse right and open fire. The 5-inch 38 caliber gun formed the backbone of American destroyer armament. Each gun weighed 990 pounds, fired a 55-pound shell at 2,600 feet per second to a maximum range of 1,800 yards, and could maintain a sustained rate of fire of 15 rounds per minute with a well-trained crew. The mount included an optical sight for direct fire and could be directed by fire control radar for longer-range engagements. Laffey's gun crews had been at general quarters for over 2 hours. They'd loaded the guns and stood ready waiting. Now at 01:01 hours, the waiting ends. The gun captain on Mount 51, the forwardmost gun shouts, "Load." The breech opens, automatically ejecting the previous shell casing. The gun had been loaded since going to general quarters, so the first shell is already chambered. The pointer and trainer align the gun using hand wheels while watching through optical sights. The fire control solution comes from the director. On the bridge range, 2,000 yards, target bearing 45 relative target course and speed estimated. Mount 51 fires. The blast is tremendous even by destroyer standards. 5-inch guns firing in rapid succession create overpressure waves that rattle the entire ship. Men on the bridge feel the shockwave through their boots. The muzzle flash illuminates everything within 50 yards, destroying night vision. The shell casing ejects and hits the deck with a metallic clang. 5 seconds later, Mount 51 fires again, and again. The sustained rate of fire climbs to 18 rounds per minute, beyond the theoretical maximum, but achievable when the crew is experienced and motivated by self-preservation. Mounts 52, 53, 54, and 55 join in, all 5 guns firing 75 rounds per minute outbound. The target, a Japanese destroyer at 2,000 yards, begins taking hits. 5-inch shells penetrate destroyer hulls easily at this range. Each hit creates a flash visible to the naked eye. After 20 seconds of fire, the target is burning. After 40 seconds, it's dead in the water. Laffey shifts fire to a second target. At 01:53 hours, Japanese cruisers open fire on the American column. 8-inch shells from Japanese heavy cruisers fall around Laffey with distinctive howling sounds that give no warning of impact point. The first salvo lands 200 yards astern, throwing up geysers 40 feet high. The second salvo lands 100 yards to starboard. The Japanese are bracketing firing over firing short, then splitting the difference for hits. The third salvo should land on target. Lieutenant Commander Hank orders flank speed and hard right rudder. The destroyer heels over, accelerating from 22 knots to 35 knots in less than 2 minutes. The third salvo falls where Laffey would have been if it had maintained course. Instead, the shells land 100 yards to port. The evasion bought 30 seconds. The American column is disintegrating. Ships are maneuvering independently, trying to avoid collisions while engaging targets that appear from unexpected directions. The cruiser, Atlanta, takes fire from multiple directions, American and Japanese ships firing at it simultaneously. The destroyer Cushing, leading the column, executes an emergency turn to avoid colliding with Japanese ships crossing ahead. The ships behind Cushing scatter to avoid the stopped lead destroyer. Formation discipline dissolves into individual ship actions. Laffey finds itself alone, engaged with targets to starboard and port simultaneously. The forward 5-inch mounts engage a Japanese destroyer to starboard. The aft mounts engage a target to port that lookouts identify as a cruiser low fast and firing back. The cruiser's shells are smaller than 8-inch, probably 5-inch or 5.5-inch, meaning a light cruiser or large destroyer. The range closes to 1,500 yards. At this distance, armor doesn't matter. Any hit will penetrate. Damage depends only on shell weight and where it hits. The cruiser fires a salvo. Laffey's helmsman sees the muzzle flashes and throws the rudder over the destroyer, responding instantly. 3 shells pass overhead, close enough to hear. 1 shell hits the water 20 feet from Laffey's port side, the impact throwing water across the deck. Another shell hits. Mount 53, the amidship's 5-inch gun, takes a direct hit. The shell, probably 5.5-inch based on the explosion, penetrates the gun shield and detonates inside the mount. The explosion kills the 5-man gun crew instantly and throws shrapnel through the adjacent compartments. Fire erupts. The ready ammunition locker, 16 shells stored near the mount for rapid reloading, cooks off in secondary explosions. The damage control party responds immediately, dragging fire hoses forward, but the mount is destroyed. 4 guns remain operational. At 01:56 hours, Laffey engages a battleship. The ship emerges from the darkness to starboard, illuminated by fires burning on other vessels. It's massive, 10 times Laffey's displacement, moving slowly at 15 knots on a converging course. The recognition silhouette matches IJN Hiei, a Congo-class battleship, mounting 8 14-inch guns in 4 twin turrets, 14 6-inch guns and casemates, and 8 5-inch dual-purpose guns. The battleship displaces 31,980 tons, standard mounts armor ranging from 8 inches on the belt to 12 inches on the turret faces, and carries a crew of 221 men. This is not a fight a destroyer can win. A single 14-inch shell weighs 1,485 pounds and can penetrate 12 inches of armor at 20,000 yards. Laffey's hull plating is 5/8 of an inch thick. The battleship's secondary battery of 6-inch guns firing 110-pound shells can sink a destroyer with sustained fire. The 5-inch guns can destroy a destroyer with direct hits. He has all of these weapons and doesn't need to fear anything Laffey can shoot back. But Laffey can shoot back. Lieutenant Commander Hank orders all guns to engage the battleship. The forward mounts 51 and 52 traverse to starboard. The aft mounts 54 and 55 are already bearing starboard from engaging the previous target. All 4 guns open fire at 1,800 yards. 5-inch shells cannot penetrate battleship armor. The belt armor, turret armor, conning tower armor all are invulnerable to destroyer fire. But battleships have vulnerabilities. The superstructure above the armored belt is thin plating, designed to resist shell fragments, not direct hits. Bridge windows are glass. Fire control directors are optical instruments that can be destroyed. Radio antennas are exposed. Radar arrays are fragile. 5-inch shells fired at point-blank range can wreck these systems even if they can't sink the ship. Laffey's gun crews pour fire into Hiei's superstructure. Shells explode against the pagoda mast, destroying radio antennas. Shells penetrate the bridge area, sending fragments through optical equipment and fire control stations. Shells rake the deck, destroying unarmored equipment. The battleship's secondary battery returns fire, but the gun crews trained for engagement at 10,000 yards, not 1,800, struggle with target solutions at near-collision ranges. At 158 hours, range closes to 1,000 yards. Laffey's torpedo officer reports solution ready on the port torpedo mount, 5 tubes loaded with Mark 15 torpedoes. Each torpedo weighs 3,141 pounds, carries a 825-pound Torpex warhead, and runs at 45 knots for 6,000 yards. At 1,000 yards time, the target is 41 seconds. Lieutenant Commander Hank orders torpedoes launched. The 5 torpedoes enter the water and arm themselves after running 100 yards. Their gyroscopes stabilize their depth mechanisms, drive them down to preset running depth of 10 feet. Their contra-rotating propellers drive them toward the target at 45 knots. From the destroyer's bridge, the phosphorescent wakes are visible 5 white lines extending toward the battleship. Hiei's lookouts spot the torpedo wakes. The battleship attempts to maneuver, but 31,980 tons cannot change course quickly. 2 torpedoes miss ahead. 1 torpedo runs deep, passing beneath the keel. 2 torpedoes hit. The Mark 15 torpedo had problems. The magnetic exploder often failed. The depth-keeping mechanism ran deeper than set. The contact exploder sometimes failed on perpendicular impacts. But at point-blank range against a slow-moving target, the torpedoes worked. The 2 hits explode against Hiei's hull below the waterline, each detonation blasting a hole approximately 20 feet in diameter. Water floods into the forward engine room and 2 boiler rooms. The battleship's speed drops to 12 knots. Damage control teams respond, but flooding is severe. Laffey has achieved something remarkable. A destroyer has torpedoed a battleship at night and lived. But lived is a relative term. Range to Hiei is now 700 yards in closing. The battleship's secondary battery has found the range. 6-inch shells are hitting with devastating regularity. At 159 hours, a 6-inch shell penetrates Laffey's bridge. The explosion kills Lieutenant Commander Hank and 4 other officers instantly. The ship's executive officer, Lieutenant Commander Edward Billings, is below deck supervising damage control and doesn't know the captain is dead. Command should pass to him, but communications are severed. The senior surviving officer on the bridge is Lieutenant George Stovall, the ship's gunnery officer. Stovall takes command. Another 6-inch shell hits the forward fire room. The boiler ruptures, releasing superheated steam at 615 pounds per square inch into the compartment. The fire room crew, 8 men, die within seconds. Steam pressure drops throughout the ship. Speed falls from 35 knots to 28 knots within 60 seconds. A third 6-inch shell hits the aft deckhouse, penetrating into enlisted berthing. The compartment is empty. All hands are at battle stations, but the explosion starts fires that spread to adjacent spaces. The damage control party responds, but the fires are spreading faster than they can be contained. At 0200 hours range to Hiei closes to 400 yards. This is collision distance. Both ships are maneuvering, but there isn't enough sea room. Stovall orders hard left rudder trying to open the range. Hiei turns right trying to ram the destroyer. The battleship's bow, reinforced for ramming, will cut the destroyer in half if it hits. Laffey's rudder response saves the ship. The destroyer turns inside the battleship's turn radius, scraping past Hiei's starboard side, with less than 100 feet separating the hulls. The battleship's secondary batteries cannot depress enough to fire at this range. The Japanese gunners watch helplessly as the destroyer passes beneath their guns. Laffey's forward 5-inch mounts fire directly into Hiei's superstructure at 70 yards, range the shells penetrating completely through the thin plating and exploding inside. Mount 52 maintains fire even as the gun traverses past its safety stops, firing directly across Laffey's own deck at the battleship. The blast strips paint and throws fragments across the destroyer's bridge. Then Laffey is past opening range on the battleship's starboard quarter. For 10 seconds, it seems like the destroyer might survive. At 0201 hours, Laffey takes fire from a second direction. Japanese destroyers have closed from astern while Laffey engaged Hiei. 3 destroyers, the American crew identifies them as Fubuki class based on silhouette, each mounting 6 5-inch guns and 9 torpedo tubes, bracket Laffey at ranges from 800 to 100 yards. The destroyer is trapped between Hiei ahead and 3 enemy destroyers astern. Mount 54 and Mount 55, the aft 5-inch guns, engage the nearest destroyer. The range is perfect for destroyer gunnery, close enough for optical fire control, far enough to avoid collision. The guns fire in local control, each mount selecting its own targets. Shells from both sides cross in mid-air. Laffey's shells hit the lead Japanese destroyer, starting fires. Japanese shells hit Laffey. One shell penetrates the aft deckhouse, exploding in the crew's mess. Another hits the starboard side amidships, penetrating into the forward engine room. The engine room begins flooding. Chief Machinist's mate Robert Thompson orders the space evacuated, but he remains behind trying to secure valves that might slow the flooding. The water rises. Thompson drowns at his station. Mount 55 takes a direct hit. The shell penetrates the gun shield and detonates inside, killing the crew. Mount 54 continues firing, now the only operational gun on the aft half of the ship. The crew of Mount 54 maintains fire discipline: load, aim, fire, even as shells hit the ship around them. They fire 32 rounds before a shell penetrates the ready magazine below the mount. The magazine explosion destroys the entire aft section of the ship. Mount 54 and its crew vanish in a fireball that rises 200 feet. The blast wave throws men on the bridge off their feet. When they stand up, the aft third of Laffey is gone, simply no longer present. The ship has broken in half at frame 70, just forward of the aft deckhouse. The stern section sinks immediately. The forward section remains afloat but dead in the water. The forward section of Laffey drifts in the darkness while the battle continues around it. Both boiler rooms are flooded or wrecked. Both engine rooms are destroyed. All electrical power is lost. Fire control systems are offline. The only operational weapons are Mounts 51 and 52, the forward 5-inch guns, which can operate in local control without electrical power. The gun crews continue loading and firing using manual training and elevation, engaging targets by eye when they appear through the smoke. Lieutenant Stovall conducts a damage assessment. The news is catastrophic. Captain Hank dead, Executive Officer Billings missing, presumed killed in the magazine explosion. Aft section of ship sunk. All propulsion lost, fire control offline. Communications offline. Estimated casualties: 87 dead, 34 wounded. The ship is finished. Stovall orders abandoned ship preparations. The crew begins launching life rafts and preparing wounded for evacuation. But they don't abandon ship immediately. Japanese ships are still maneuvering through the area. Entering the water now means risking death from Japanese gunfire from sharks attracted by blood or from hypothermia in waters that are 79 degrees warm enough to delay death but not prevent it. The crew waits. At 22:15 hours, a Japanese destroyer approaches the drifting wreck. Range closes to 600 yards. The destroyer's gun crews can see Laffey is mortally wounded but are under orders to confirm kills. They prepare to fire. Mount 51 and Mount 52 open fire. The gun crews have been standing by for 14 minutes waiting. They fire every shell in the ready lockers, 16 shells per mount, 32 total. The Japanese destroyer takes multiple hits and turns away, not willing to trade damage with a destroyer that's already sinking. At 02:24 hours, Stovall orders abandon ship. The crew goes over the side, swimming away from the hull to avoid being dragged down when it sinks. The wounded go first, assisted by able-bodied sailors who support them in the water. Officers go last, checking compartments to ensure no living men remain aboard. Stovall is the last man off, swimming away from the ship he's commanded for 23 minutes. The forward section of Laffey remains afloat for another 17 minutes. At 02:41 hours, the hull rolls to starboard and sinks bow first. The depth is 1,800 feet. The wreck falls for nearly 4 minutes before hitting bottom. The Battle of Guadalcanal, later called the First Naval Battle of Guadalcanal to distinguish it from another engagement 2 nights later, continued for another 23 minutes after Laffey sank. The outcome was chaos without clear victor. The Americans lost 2 destroyers, sunk Laffey and Barton, and 2 more heavily damaged. 2 light cruisers, Atlanta and Juno, were sunk. Atlanta during the night action, Juno the following morning by submarine. 2 heavy cruisers sustained major damage. American casualties totaled 1,439 dead and 371 wounded across all ships. The Japanese lost 2 destroyers sunk during the engagement. Hiei, damaged by Laffey's torpedoes among other hits, withdrew, but could only make 12 knots. At dawn, American aircraft from Henderson Field on Guadalcanal found the crippled battleship and attacked relentlessly. After sustaining multiple bomb and torpedo hits, Hiei's crew scuttled the ship northwest of Savo Island. A battleship sunk by destroyers and aircraft, proving that the age of battleship supremacy had ended. The Japanese admitted 1,026 casualties across all ships engaged. Tactically, neither side won decisively. Strategically, the Americans achieved their objective, preventing Japanese battleships from bombarding Henderson Field. The airfield remained operational. Japanese plans to land reinforcements on Guadalcanal required postponement. The campaign continued, but the strategic balance shifted permanently in American favor. For Laffey's survivors, the battle was personal mathematics. Of 250 crew, 59 survived. 191 men died, 76% casualties. Most deaths occurred in the magazine explosion that destroyed the aft section. The survivors spent 6 hours in the water before rescue by USS Portland, which had sustained heavy damage itself but could still maneuver. The after-action reports compiled in the weeks following the battle attempted to extract lessons from the chaos. The American formation had been wrong for night surface combat. Putting destroyers in column ahead and astern of cruisers prevented the destroyers from executing coordinated torpedo attacks while making them vulnerable to enemy fire. The Japanese formation destroyers concentrated for offensive action. Capital ships positioned for mutual support proved more effective. American fire discipline had been inadequate. Multiple ships firing at the same targets while ignoring others created wasteful redundancy. Ships fired at radar contacts without visual confirmation, resulting in friendly fire. The cruiser Atlanta took fire from American ships, contributing to its loss. American doctrine emphasized radar fire control, assuming technological superiority would overcome Japanese night fighting expertise. The battle proved otherwise. Radar provided detection, but couldn't prevent intermingling of forces at close range, where visual identification became impossible. Japanese training for night combat, extensive practice in visual identification, torpedo attack, coordination, aggressive closing tactics proved superior to American reliance on technology. But the report also documented examples of individual heroism and tactical excellence. Laffey's engagement of Hiei entered naval history as an example of destroyer courage, sailing between 2 enemy formations, engaging a battleship at point-blank range, scoring torpedo hits, and continuing to fight until physically destroyed. The destroyer couldn't win against a battleship, but it could make the battleship bleed. The Navy awarded Lieutenant Commander Hank the Navy Cross posthumously. The citation read, "For extraordinary heroism and distinguished service in the line of his profession as commanding officer of the USS Laffey during action against enemy Japanese naval forces off Savo Island on the night of 12-13 November 1942. When his ship came under devastating attack by vastly superior hostile forces, Lieutenant Commander Hank fought his vessel with superb courage and skill, inflicting severe damage upon the Japanese before the Laffey was struck by enemy gunfire and sank." The citation didn't mention the specific details: the torpedoing of Hiei, the point-blank engagement, the aft section blown off. Those details existed in classified reports. What mattered for public consumption was simpler. A destroyer fought a battleship and died fighting. The Navy commissioned USS Laffey DD-724 on February 8, 1944, 15 months after DD-459 sank. The new ship was a Sumner-class destroyer, larger and more heavily armed than its predecessor: 6 5-inch guns in 3 twin mounts, 12 40mm anti-aircraft guns, 11 20mm guns, 10 torpedo tubes. The crew included survivors from DD-459 who requested assignment to the new ship carrying their ship's name. DD-724 saw extensive combat in the Pacific, including the Okinawa campaign, where it survived an attack by 22 Japanese aircraft, took 6 kamikaze hits and 4 bomb hits, and remained afloat. The crew called it the ship that would not die, a nickname earned through similar courage to DD-459. But DD-724's survival shouldn't obscure DD-459's sacrifice. The original Laffey fought when the outcome of the Guadalcanal campaign remained uncertain, when American doctrine for night surface combat was inadequate, when equipment was less capable and crew training less developed. DD-459 fought and died in a confused melee where its commanding officer made tactical decisions in seconds while shells fell around him. Hank chose to engage the battleship when he could have tried to escape. He closed to torpedo range knowing his ship would take fire. He fought until his ship physically couldn't fight anymore. Those decisions, made in the span of 12 minutes at 1:48 to 0200 hours on November 13, 1942, exemplified destroyer doctrine: engage the enemy, regardless of odds, exploit speed and maneuverability to close for torpedo attack, inflict damage even at cost of your own destruction. Destroyers were expendable. Capital ships were not. If trading a destroyer for a battleship was possible, you made the trade. Hiei sank the next day from accumulated damage. Laffey's torpedoes contributed to that sinking 2 holes below the waterline that flooding parties couldn't control while under air attack. Whether those torpedo hits were decisive or merely contributory is unknowable. What's documented is that a 2395-ton destroyer damaged a 980-ton battleship severely enough that follow-on attacks could finish it. The exchange rate favored the Americans. 1 destroyer for 1 battleship represented catastrophic victory for the Tin Can Navy. Today, Laffey DD-724 serves as a museum ship at Patriots Point in Charleston, South Carolina. Visitors tour the decks, see the battle damage from kamikaze strikes, red plaques describing the ship's service record. The ship represents destroyer resilience, the ability to absorb punishment and survive. DD-459 rests in 1,800 feet of water northwest of Guadalcanal, part of what locals call Iron Bottom Sound, for the dozens of ships sunk there during 6 months of naval combat. The wreck has never been located. It likely sits bow down in bottom mud, the forward section, where Mounts 51 and 52 fought until the end, now corroded and collapsing. No memorial marks the location. The families of the 191 dead received telegrams, attended memorial services, and moved on with their lives. The war continued for another 33 months. The battle itself disappeared into larger narratives about Guadalcanal, overshadowed by the more decisive Second Naval Battle of Guadalcanal 2 nights later, where battleship USS Washington sank battleship Kirishima in a textbook radar-directed gunnery engagement. That battle fit the narrative. The Navy preferred technological superiority and disciplined fire control, producing victory. The chaotic melee of November 13th didn't fit any narrative except honest confusion. But Laffey's fight mattered in ways the after-action reports couldn't measure. It demonstrated that American destroyers would engage superior forces without hesitation. It proved that damage to capital ships was possible even from outmatched vessels. It showed that American crews could fight effectively in confused night actions despite doctrinal inadequacies. And it established a tradition: destroyers bearing the name Laffey would fight regardless of odds. The mathematics of naval combat are unforgiving. A destroyer cannot defeat a battleship in single combat. The armor, the firepower, the displacement all favor the capital ship. But combat isn't mathematics. Combat is 300 men making thousands of micro-decisions under fire, and sometimes those decisions add up to outcomes that mathematics say shouldn't be possible. At 01:48 hours on November 13, 1942, USS Laffey sailed toward a battleship when it could have turned away. At 01:58 hours, it launched torpedoes knowing the battleship would return fire. At 0200 hours, it passed within 100 feet of that battleship, while its forward guns fired directly across its own deck. 24 minutes later, it was sinking. The ship died. 2 torpedoes hit. 1 battleship ultimately sank. The tin can took on the Japanese fleet. The tin can lost. But the battleship didn't survive the battle either. Sometimes that's what victory looks like. Both sides lose, but one side loses less.